So once again, this is the IEP Checklist webinar for Tuesday, August 31st. Welcome to the webinar, and we'll get started. Our main purpose for today is to introduce, or perhaps for a couple of you, reintroduce you to a helpful resource that Wisconsin Facets created and has been able to provide for many families and other special education stakeholders for meeting preparation, what to do before, during, and after an IEP meeting, how to talk to your child and how to involve your child in the process, basic parent rights, parameters of what an IEP is and what it is not, and different ways of navigating some disagreements are all things that we'll cover today. And I particularly like the end section on successful IEP tips and strategies. But first, we're just going to kick it off with a little bit of background about Wisconsin Facets. I see, judging by the names of those who have joined the live call, I see perhaps many first-time participants in one of our trainings. So if this is your first engagement with Facets, I think it's an appropriate time to get engaged, and this is an appropriate resource to familiarize yourself with and a training to take. So who we are is we're a statewide nonprofit, as I mentioned pre-recording, supporting families of children with disabilities, the young adults themselves, and professionals who support them through the IEP and special education processes. This also pertains to families that might be embroiled in something Section 504 related, but for today's training, we're going to focus on IEPs. We serve all disability types. The federal grant definition of a youth is birth to 26. That does not mean that when someone calls, perhaps is not totally familiar with what we do, if they identify the person in question as being, for example, age 30, we don't hang up the phone on anybody. We talk to all. But at that point, it becomes more connecting with community-based resources, perhaps in the employment or adult services arenas, as opposed to school things, since most, if not all of you on this call probably know that the maximum age to receive school services in a public school system is age 21. But we will talk to anyone and help them as best we can. We were literally founded by two women who started with one brochure for one grant and operated out of the trunk of their car, but they were women who saw a need to help families because they were educated individuals who had sons with varying but significant disabilities, and they had experienced problems, and basically said, well, if we're having this much trouble being heard and engaging with the schools, what about families who don't have the education and other resources that we have? So that is a little bit about how Facets came into being. So what makes us unique, or put another way, a little bit of how we do what we do. We make every effort to recognize and respect diversity in terms of options, needs, and dreams of people with disabilities. So my job on the phone is not to squelch anything. I mean, except in terms of when I hear something happening that is factually false, based on rights or options or how the process works. We approach every call with an open mind, and the reality is that the calls themselves are just like the kids. No two are alike, and our job is to do our work by empowering parents and those supporting the youth to make the choices that best meets the needs of a person with a disability. Because no matter the experience that we have or the amount of work that we do in general or with a particular family, parents will always know their children best, and it goes beyond the cliche of you are your child's first teacher, which is of course true, but we are not the ones, when we come into a situation, we are not the ones who have the rights or the decision-making authority. We do not and cannot give legal advice that would get us in very hot water in a number of ways, and most importantly, do a disservice to the families. and to the kids. So we do our work as much as we can. We try to strengthen collaborative partnerships. We may come into a meeting or to a situation having some disagreement based on what we've learned from a parent about what's going on with their child, having a different approach or a disagreement with a school about how we are going to get to a solution or what the right things are. But we do hope, and typically I do find, having taken tons of calls and been to a lot of meetings over the years, typically I do find that we do want the same things. It's just a matter of, disagreeing on some of the how and some of the things that happen around the edges. But in doing our work, we also strengthen early conflict resolution, which for purposes of today means a couple of things, mainly starting at the local level, trying to resolve the dispute, any disagreement within the school, if necessary, going up the chain of command to special education supervisors and the like. There is a renowned mediation system that serves families in schools in Wisconsin. And that happens to be the greatest level of support that we're able to provide, because mediation is really the last stand in dispute resolution. And, before filing a state complaint or taking some type of due process or legal action, we can only give general information about those things, but we can provide more intensive support, basically for anything on through mediations. How the mediation system itself works is a separate presentation that we will offer, for sure, in the coming calendar year of 2022. But we do have regular dispute resolution option trainings here. I should mention before we go any deeper, there is probably one point about halfway through in the presentation that I will pause to see if there are any questions. Otherwise, I will certainly take time for those at the end. I may say, if there's an early question, if it's something I'm going to address, I might hold on to that until later, but there will be time for questions during today's presentation. So let's talk then about a little bit of the foundation of IEPs. Most of you probably know it stands for Individualized Education Program. It is a legal document that is developed because data show that it's going to be essential to a child's educational success. It helps create a foundation for a meaningful future, hopefully even after child graduates or exits out of high school and the IEP itself doesn't follow them. It's laid that foundation so that families have some idea how their child learns best, what accommodations have worked and probably not worked for them, because most of the time things will not be seamless and perfect. We kind of wouldn't need to be here as facets if it were. So the purpose of this resource and this presentation is that parents need to get ready early, actively participate, and stay connected throughout the school year, meaning don't engage with your child's IEP when the reality hits that it's time for an annual or when there's a disagreement. Ask questions, be proactive, be engaged with your child's teachers, with your child, and anyone else that is working to support your child. But I will say that a sure sign of an engaged adult is one that would take a training like this. So I'm not worried about that where I sit with you all today, but stay engaged throughout the process. So we just wanted to include, this is the official graphic for an IEP evaluation timeline supplied by the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, which of course is the governing body of all school districts, essentially. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we see that there are several steps to the process, and the timelines, the differences between business days and calendar days are laid out here. We do say, as always, that if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So if any of you are seeing this for the first time and or seeing it after having had some informal exchange with your school about doing an IEP, and they've been putting you off or what have you, ignoring you altogether. I hope not. But if you have, this is the official legal timeline that schools have to carry out an official referral process. So it should be in writing, and anybody with a vested interest in the child's success can do a referral. We as facets, as support people, cannot, but a parent can, a teacher can, uh, anybody, a school administrator can, a therapist can, doctor, people of that nature, they all can write a special education referral. So just a few quick bullet points. You see here are some things an IEP is and what it isn't. So it's a program of special ed and related services. Of course, the I stands for individualized, so that's where that bullet comes from. It is student-centered, and that goes along with the idea of specialized services and that every kid is going to be different. So a school cannot say, and this gets to one of the things it isn't being a predetermined program. A school cannot say, for example, well, your child has been identified as having educational autism, and this is what we do here in school X for kids on the autism spectrum. It must be individualized. It is a legal commitment, of course, of resources and services to be provided to that child. It is not a guarantee of success, but a well-written IEP, nobody does this for their health, so to speak. So a well-written IEP should lead to some measure of success and some targeted, support so that we can find out what works, what doesn't, where we might need to tweak goals and supports, etc. A tool to measure the child's progress. First and foremost, we need some data on where the child is with whatever's in the IEP when the IEP is developed. So in effect, why do we need it? That's why there's an evaluation process. But goals themselves must be specific, measurable, and attainable. And of course, those things are mostly relative terms. So that's where discussion comes in during evaluation and during IEP meetings. And you can kind of argue back and forth, with certain people about what is most appropriate, but that's why we have a team of people that make up IEP decision makers. It is changeable by the IEP team, and the ways to do that in brief are to have another IEP meeting. You have the right to reopen at any time, or for something that is relatively small in nature, there is a form, happens to be called the I-10, but it's part of the sort of special education suite of forms. But if making changes to an IEP without a meeting, the parent must agree in writing that that's okay to happen. So an IEP is not a daily lesson plan, and it is not teacher-centered, and we covered that it's not a predetermined program. The reason it's not a daily lesson plan is it cannot be written such that, in history class, Mrs. Smith will support the student, each and every day in this manner. Well, one thing is it won't name names, because what if life happens to Mrs. Smith? But it is a compilation of different forms, which are the present level of performance, the disability related needs, which the goals are based on, and then the services, supports, accommodations required to help the student meet those goals. The other reason it's not a daily lesson plan is think of how long and hard to read it would be. If you think an IEP is hard to read the way they exist now, imagine if we made it into a daily lesson plan. Teacher-centered, I would simply emphasize that it's not based on thoughts or feelings, no matter how high quality a professional may be and how caring about a student they may be. It's a data-driven process, and that's why the state has specific criteria for each disability category that help determine eligibility, and then we cannot do cookie cutter supports once we have that category. I prefer the term disability category to label. I think label has a negative connotation, and it can stop people from pursuing IEPs or doing the right thing by kids. But categories are mostly for the data-driven paperwork that leads us to developing the IEP in the first place. So this is the picture of the resource itself. Just a quick note that this is available at wifacets.org for free download in a PDF format. It's an 8-page document, not hard to read. That's why we did this. If you would like a printed copy, contact me, contact our office. If it's just a few that you need, we can mail it out to you. Otherwise, you'll see that on our resources page of our website, they're available for bulk orders, and all of our services are free. But in this case, the reason for the cost is the fact that they are expensive to produce. But with all that said, let's dive into before, during, and after the IEP, the meat of this IEP checklist resource. I'm not seeing any questions at this time, so I'm just going to go ahead and start on the before slides. Feel free to type in the question box, and I'm monitoring that as we go. But to get into meat, you'll receive an invitation as a parent that includes the day, time, location, room number, all of those things, whether now the meeting is virtual or in person. You'll receive an invitation either by email or in the mail, because again, it must be in writing, to your child's IEP meeting. So it'll say all of the different roles and who's attending. So real quickly, the required team members are going to be, if it's, whether it's an initial IEP or for an existing annual review or review revise, the required team members are special education teacher, a regular education teacher, unless it's a case of very significantly delayed in which the student literally has no regular ed time. That would be the exception to that. But otherwise, special and regular ed teachers, an administrative representative or LEA, we'll get into that shortly, what that means, but whether it's an AP, principal, some other administrative representative, they will be there. Anybody, if it's an evaluation, the school psych or someone who conducted testing and observation and is able to interpret those results is required to attend. Parents are required to attend, etc. So does date, time, and location work? One thing that happens on the run up to a meeting is that the school is required to make 3 contact attempts and document it on an IEP form, usually with different methods if more than one contact is required, to say, hey, the date for the annual IEP is coming up, what days and times may work for you. It can be phone call, text message, mailing, whatever it might be. Any of those methods are acceptable. They must document them, however, on the IEP. The one scenario in which the school can have a meeting without the parent agreeing to attend is if the IEP is quote unquote expiring. In other words, if they don't have a meeting by the end date of the prior IEP, the school needs to go ahead in order that they legally have had that annual meeting. Then the best thing for the parent to do becomes, when you're able to attend, request to reopen the IEP, at least so that you have an understanding of any changes in the IEP that you see, and you can give your parent perspective of that. So even if there's no dispute, that's what we'd say there. Should your student attend, that's a personal call. Beginning at age 14, they're required to be invited to attend, and that's because we won't get into this in great detail today, but at that point, there is a new section of the IEP called transition, and the team is required to develop goals in the area of employment and post-secondary education or training, and an independent living goal is part of that too, but that is optional. So that is based on the student's strengths, interests, needs, and preferences. So they're required to invite the students, sort of interview the student before the meeting, and we highly encourage input at that time. And we would encourage student participation, even if it's just to introduce themselves or team members to one another, just as a bit of a self-advocacy exercise prior to age 14. But ultimately, it's personal call, made among the parent and student as a family decision should they attend. Now, if any team member asks to be excused from the meeting, that is important to know. That is acceptable, particularly when, really only when, their area of expertise or knowledge is not being discussed. So let's say, for example, your child has speech therapy as a related service, but maybe it's not an annual meeting and speech does not need to be discussed. There's nothing to settle there. The proper procedure is for the school to produce a form, again, for the parent to sign, that indicates it's okay with them that the speech teacher not attend the meeting, or whoever it might be. One thing that does happen as a practical matter is if a meeting starts to run longer, parents will sometimes be asked, typically only verbally, is it okay that Mr. So-and-so, who's already spoken his piece, leaves because he has no coverage for his class, or he needs to go coach, or whatever it might be. That is something that happens. Technically, parents do need to excuse those things in writing. When attending meetings, it's not something that if there's issue enough for facets to be there, it's not something that I've ever encouraged parents to outright stop a meeting because they weren't asked to do it in writing. There's usually sort of bigger fish to fry. But procedurally speaking, team members, if any, need to be excused in the beginning or for leaving in the middle, that needs to be done in writing. So sign and return the invitation. Signing isn't so much a thing anymore, but it's still an effective practice. If appropriate for you as a parent, to include a list in writing of concerns or issues you have, the aforementioned approval or disapproval. By the way, if a parent disapproved, the meeting should stop and reconvene at a time that that person they're not approving be excused, can make it. We do still need to pay attention to, when is the end date for the IEP that we're in, or when do we need to have an IEP developed by. A list of who you are bringing can include somebody like a support person from Facets, your child's therapist if you have one. This is not required for parents to do this, but we present this information as best practice because one of the things most commonly that parents call about is a lack of open communication on the school's part toward them. So we are not going to encourage parents to conduct themselves in a similar manner toward the school. So also before the IEP, make sure you're organized, getting your child's records together. On bullet point 2, you see some examples of record types. Whether it's prior IEPs, school communication laws, outside documentation, doctor's recommendations, etc., that may be helpful. That does not mean you have to bring the whole cumulative folder of those items to every IEP meeting. In fact, you should not. It's practically impossible to, you might be able to keep the records together, but you probably can't keep all the information in them straight in your mind. So prioritize things like current IEP drafts, prior year's IEP as a point of comparison and contrast to what might be changing this year, progress reports, and that list of parent concerns that you may have. Consider keeping a parent record folder. This one is more just about find that format that works for you. Some people are still paper people. I am not. I prefer electronic. But whatever it is that works for you, do that. Bring it with you to the meeting so that you can easily prepare for the meeting and have it easily accessible should you need it in the meeting itself. With virtual meetings and a lot of families staying home to do this, some of that piece, it's become easier to stay organized if those items don't need to leave the home or our devices. But stay organized because you can't advocate for your child without that. Also, prepping. And these are all, like, even these first few before we get down toward the bottom. Well, actually, it's not on this slide, so it's talk to your child's teachers. So back to the general point is I want to say right off the top that it's okay, particularly as your student ages, to get their perspectives and concerns with these questions and others. So what's good? What has your child accomplished, particularly spanning one IEP period to another? What's worked well, what needs more work. You're going to be able to glean some of this information from IEP goals and the accommodations you've had, particularly if the goal areas are somewhat long-standing and the accommodations have been consistent through school years. Always, as a parent, prioritizing questions or concerns, and going back to the last slide on organization, whether it's writing those out on paper, including a list on your phone. Very few parents have what I would consider to be reliable on the spot recall when prompted by someone running the IEP meeting to the point where they can be confident that they haven't missed anything. You don't want to be driving home or logging off of a meeting going, oh, that's what I should have brought up and didn't. So talk to your child's teacher, special and regular ed. What are they noticing? What's the rhythm of the day like? Again, some of these same questions. What's good? What needs improvement? Are they receptive to the IEP supports? What other methods might we need to try? If you're bringing someone with you to the meeting, connect about their roles. So for example, if it's a facets person or other support person, again, let the school team know in writing that that person is coming in the interest of open communication and collaboration, because it's one of those things, if that happens, there's probably something going on. Something causes a parent to contact us in the first place. It doesn't mean everyone hates each other, but there's probably, everything is not hunky-dory when we get calls. If there is something of a personal history between parents and particular IEP team members, as far as it depends on you, that needs to be checked at the door in the name of getting your child's needs met. So if you are bringing anyone with you as a support, be sure to contact at least the person running the IEP meeting at the school and let them know who they are, what their role is going to be. So participation, very evidently they can't know what you're thinking, and you can't advocate for your child without speaking up. So bring notes if you have them. Request introductions if needed. I do think that in a virtual meeting age, this has gotten better. We had some doubts at the start of COVID how this was going to work for families as far as participation and using technology and the like, but on the whole, it's actually in many cases been an improvement because you're not seated next to somebody that perhaps you don't like. It's easier to kind of know when to jump in and speak up because you can see, seeing people's faces helps and you can see them finish talking. So introductions are important. I would say they've become a little bit less of an issue over the years. Finding out who is serving as the local education agency representative, or LEA, that simply means somebody from the school or district with the authority to make decisions about resources. So that could be a building principal, could be a school psychologist, could be the district level special ed director, school social worker, etc. It should not be, I've seen it even recently, but it really should not be the same person who is the special ed teacher and would also be serving as the primary author of the IEP. So, but find out who that LEA is, and local education agency in its simplest form means the district. So if you live, for example, in Milwaukee, Milwaukee Public Schools is your LEA, but in this context of an individual IEP meeting, it means who is the district representative here with the authority to commit resources to something that I feel my child needs. So share your thoughts. I think that's pretty clear. You know, there are no dumb questions. And if something said by someone else is not clear, you know, ask for it to be repeated or clarified. You can ask for short breaks if you need one, whether it's to meet a physical need or to have a little cooling off period. It happens. So ask for a break if you need one, and then have an agreed upon time to resume the meeting. So before the meeting ends, make sure you understand the IEP's contents. Ask if you don't know who's responsible for each part of the IEP. If you disagree with anything, ask that your concerns be in writing. That may be over and above the parent concerns section. That's part of all IEPs within the present level of performance section. Make sure to get a copy of the IEP. You probably won't leave with a locked version of the IEP on site if you're in person, or right away after a virtual meeting, but within about 5 days or so, you should be seeing that. It's pretty clear. If you didn't finish, make sure to schedule another meeting soon. Best practice on that would be do that when you still have everybody on the meeting, or as many people as possible on the meeting that will be needed to finish the next time, because it's much easier to look at schedules up front than have to rush off and say, we'll start an email chain later on. And these are all things that Wisconsin Facets, particularly the first 3 points, this is the during the IEP portion of the training, of course, but these are things that we would emphasize in preparation, going into a meeting for parents to have command of, particularly when it comes to, you know, working up parent concerns and how and when those will be presented. Some meetings, the person running the show will start with that. Some meetings it goes in order, and some perhaps if they're of some length or for some specific area might come more towards the end, but they should be addressed. The parent concerns section does not mean that that part compels the school in every case to do what the parent is asking, but there should at least be understanding of what the concerns are and conversation around them, and hopefully nothing that produces massive disagreement. If that is the case, at minimum, another meeting will probably be necessary, and perhaps some of that formal dispute resolution that we introduced at the start of today's webinar. So we move now into the follow-up sections. Reviewing the IEP with your child is appropriate, discussing its expectations. The if appropriate part is key, and as it implies, that implies a personal sort of conversation and decision as a family. When is appropriate, how much for you as a parent is appropriate to share with your child. It's not only a matter of age, but disability type and significance of that disability, but it is a personal choice. And if you need to go back to the questions of, you know, what worked well, what didn't, what are the next steps going to be that we kind of showed you earlier. Share a copy of the IEP with anyone who works with your child outside of the school. Mainly that means therapists, doctors, other providers that your child may be engaged with. At Wisconsin Facets, we are asked to review a lot of IEPs, typically in preparation for meetings, so we can help the parent organize their concerns and let them know what their rights are within and what the next steps might be. as they go through the meeting process. Occasionally, I'm also asked to review IEPs as they have been changed following a meeting, basically to make sure that it accurately reflects what has been discussed. Typically, that will happen in a meeting that we have supported directly. But share that IEP with anyone that you're comfortable sharing it with who has some knowledge to contribute, and of course, that vested interest in the child's success. Review the IEP frequently. This is mainly going back to the point of, ideally, this is not something that just happens once the school contacts the family about the need to have an IEP meeting, because it's that time of year. The more you review it and familiarize yourself with what's in it, the fewer curveballs you're going to have throughout the year, so far as depends on you anyway. And in this time of online databases where we can check attendance and grades and different things, on a daily basis, some districts will actually upload and use a tool called IEP at a glance that might be uploaded into some of those databases, and that varies by district and which one they decide to use, and also just a matter of personal preference. But the way to not be shocked at an IEP meeting is to review the IEP has been updated frequently, double checking to make sure all of your child's teachers and support staff know that the IEP has been updated. I keep forgetting to add that character there. I would say this, that ideally should not be a primarily parental job. And what I mean by that is, again, in this age of instant communication, email in particular within a school, if I'm the case manager and I had an opportunity to train on this, what I would tell them is establish a distribution list for everybody whose IEP you are responsible for, and make sure that when meetings happen, at the start of a school year, like right now, make sure that all this teachers assigned to work with a particular student have at least some knowledge of what the IEP. Now, is the gym teacher going to know the ins and outs of everything that's behind this, for example? Probably not. But at least the pertinent points that would apply to his or her class is something that should be shared with any individual working with a student with a disability. That includes teachers, aides. Keep in mind that aides cannot teach. They're working under the direct supervision of a teacher, but that aides can be a part of an email chain, and sometimes they have on some level as close, if not closer, a relationship with a student. But double checking, never a bad thing. One back, just a few quick points. Remember, as I said, you're the expert on your child. Parents are equal members of the IEP team. That is a true statement, or it wouldn't be in here. The caveat coming from me would just be that does not mean that, for example, if there's a disagreement when we come to an IEP meeting and there are 5 school team members in various roles, and there are 2 parents and say 1 support person, that if a parent finds 2 other support people of various kinds, that any decisions will be made with a democratic show of hands. The point of this bullet, I think, is that parents need to have their voices heard because they are the experts on the student. Your school team has your child 6 to 7 hours a day, and particularly the older they get, it might be largely completely new people each school year. So it's the idea that the meeting is conducted conversationally, collaboratively, and that everybody in it has an opportunity to have their say to gain input into goal development and any other decisions being made. It does not mean that there's 4 of them, there need to be 4 of us, and it's that sort of competitive dynamic, but it's more the spirit of being an equal member. We talked about reviewing the IEP frequently and the right to reopen it at any time. And if you have questions about any of these things, there is the statewide toll-free number for our help desk at our website, which is filled with resources, trainings, and all of those are free unless your request, as I mentioned earlier, is to buy copies of the checklist in bulk. So successful tips and strategies. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. Most of them have been covered or are pretty intuitive. Prioritizing your child's needs. We have talked about things if they're not in writing, in effect, they don't exist. This whole thing has been about the importance of preparation. Making it personal, the parentheses are key there. It means keeping it focused on your child. It doesn't mean, well, I really can't stand the principal. I'm going to go into a meeting in such a way as I can win on certain points with that person. That takes the focus off of your child. And again, if you're taking this training, you probably have the right mindset going in that you just want to do the best you can to meet your child's needs most appropriately. So I'm not super concerned about it, but just to clarify what that means. Having an open mind. I do get, from time to time, and depending on the circumstances, we may get calls from parents who are just starting out with their child's first IEP, or I might get one from somebody who says they've had 3, 4, 5 in a year, and that, at that point their frustration is probably boiling over. But one thing I try to shy away from in preparing parents is that we cannot really script. You know, vast majority of IEP meetings, I try to say I'm not in the prediction business, but I don't prep in the mode of we do some, if they say this, then you have the right to do this. But then if I tell parents that, sometimes they'll say, well, you know, what if they say no, in the spirit of that means that parents in advocating for their child will want to shy away from asserting a certain point that is really important to them. So that, in the sense of having an open mind, is really what we're driving at here, and that would apply to other team members as well, but this training is obviously geared toward parents. So this is so far as it depends on you, have an open mind point to get across here. So communicating clearly, anything and everything revolves around that. My favorite one probably on this entire list is the note of a little sugar goes a long way, because a genuine thank you is important, even if it's somebody that you don't necessarily get along with. And quite often, parents aren't going to exchange holiday gifts with their child's IEP team members. I actually have had one time of their own volition, a parent, was describing to me a very intense situation. Lots of people going to be in this IEP meeting, a lot of rancor led up to it. Go to the meeting and she brings in this huge plate of homemade baked goods. They were good too. There was nothing in them. It wasn't a trap. So since then, I've actually used that and have seen the sort of mood of the room, the atmosphere get friendlier and more conversational when I've had parents say, if you're so inclined, you could do this. I tend to think that meeting hosts schools for in-person meeting, probably a best practice is to offer water. But any other consumables will likely have to be brought in by individuals for themselves, or if a parent chooses to put that form of a little sugar on the team, that will be up to them. And we've covered the importance throughout of keeping accurate and accessible records. So this picture, and I know it's from 2017, but this is a picture of what a typical training calendar looks like. We'll put this out annually. So we've got some great stuff lined up on a wide variety of topics, including we are going to be on part 3 of a new 10-part IEP module series that we've developed. So part 3 will be coming up next. I think it's in about a week or so. All of our webinars, again, are free. You can register right from the events page, and we do bring in a lot of experts and people that are not the small Wisconsin Facet staff, particularly if it's a more specialized topic, something disability specific or behavior, things of that nature. So we encourage you to check those out. And that, we've come to the end of our presentation. My email is in the chat. One reason I put it there was in case somebody was not able to successfully download the PowerPoint for today. But I'll see if there are any questions now and give you guys a moment to type. But also, if you have deeper child-specific questions, you can email me or call the help desk number on the prior slide, and we will get to that individually. Again, a reminder that in about an hour after the webinar, you'll receive an email link with a SurveyMonkey. Please do take a couple of minutes of your time to fill out that evaluation so that we know how we did and can stay funded to do our work. But we don't record Q&A, so I'll stop the recording now and then see if we have any.